She came to the palace with one bag. Not a trunk, not a collection of things that said, "I plan to stay and matter here." One bag, brown leather, cracked at the corners, smelling of her mother's kitchen and the cedar tree that grew outside her bedroom window back home. She held it with both hands in front of her, because she did not know what else to do with her hands, and she had learned a long time ago that when you do not know what to do with your hands, you give them something to hold. The palace gates were iron, old iron, the kind that had seen enough centuries to stop caring what walked through it. She walked through it. Nobody clapped. Nobody bowed. The attendants lined up along the entrance corridor looked at her the way people look at weather, noting it, making calculations, not particularly moved by it. She was 22. She was the mate of the Alpha King. She had not asked to be either of those things. Her name was Riva. Not a palace name, not a name that sounded like it belonged in a throne room or above a crest, or spoken in the kind of voice men used when they wanted to seem important. Riva, 4 letters. Her grandmother had named her after a river that dried up every summer and came back every spring without fail, and her grandmother had said that was the whole point. She came from the Voss pack, mid-range. Not poor but not powerful. The kind of pack that showed up at the regional summits and sat in the chairs toward the back and brought decent food to the shared table and left without having caused any trouble or made any particular impression. Her father had 4 daughters and a drought-ruined farm, and a laugh so big it embarrassed him in formal settings. Her mother made bread that people drove 40 minutes to buy. Her 3 older sisters had all married inside the pack, inside the territory, inside the comfortable radius of everything familiar. And then the blood pool happened to Riva at the regional summit, when she was 22 and standing near the refreshment table, eating a roll she hadn't paid for, and thinking about whether she should take a second one, and across the crowded hall, the Alpha King turned his head and looked at her like something in him had just received information it had not requested and did not know what to do with. She dropped the roll. He looked away. But the pull had already done what the pull does. You cannot unring that bell. Every alpha pair who had ever tried to fight a blood pull had eventually stopped trying, or stopped existing. The bond was older than any of the laws written around it. It did not care about convenience or politics or the fact that the Alpha King was 31 and had already buried a wife and a brother in the same calendar year, and had, by all available evidence, sealed every door inside himself with something stronger than lock and key. 3 weeks after the summit, a formal party came to her father's house. She packed one bag. She kept the cedar smell in the leather, because it was the only piece of home she was certain nobody could take from her. The Alpha King's name was Kale. She learned this from the attendants, not from him. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. The whole kingdom knew his name the way you know the name of the mountain at the edge of your map, not because you've been there, not because you'd particularly want to be there, but because it's large enough and permanent enough that it orients everything else around it. She saw him for the first time properly the evening she arrived. He was standing at the end of the main hall, speaking to 2 men in military dress, and he did not look up when she was brought in. She stood there for a moment, her one bag, her cracked leather, her cedar smell, and she understood clearly and without drama that she was not the most important thing in this room, and possibly not in his world at all. He was built the way people are built when generations of something hard have been selecting for it. Not tall in a showy way, solid. The kind of solid that makes you recalibrate what you thought solid meant. Dark hair, longer than she expected for a king. A jaw that looked like it had made decisions. Eyes that, when he finally glanced up, briefly, by accident almost, were the color of deep water, the kind that does not show you what is underneath it. He glanced. He looked away. He did not speak to her. An attendant named Mira took her to the east wing and showed her a set of rooms that were beautiful, in the way that rooms are beautiful when someone furnishes them without knowing the person who will live in them. Everything was correct. Nothing was right. "These are your chambers, my lady," Mira said. Riva looked at the door at the end of the hall. The king's wing. She had done enough research to know where it was. "And those?" she asked. Mira's face did a small, careful thing. His Majesty's private chambers. Riva nodded. Unpacked her one bag, found places for everything. Her books in the window seat, her grandmother's shawl over the reading chair, the small clay pot she'd brought from home on the windowsill, because her mother had said, plants in a new place help the place remember, it's supposed to be alive. She put her hands on the windowsill and looked out at the palace gardens in the evening light. She did not think about the door down the hall. She thought about whether the soil in the garden looked like it could grow tomatoes. The door stayed closed, not just that first night, every night, for 5 years. She understood it on the third day, not when anyone told her, but when she stopped waiting for someone to tell her and simply added it up herself. She was good at adding things up. She'd run her father's farm accounts since she was 16. Numbers did not lie or soften or leave things out. The numbers here were plain. He did not eat with her. He did not walk with her. He appeared at the ceremonies where her presence was protocol, standing exactly far enough from her to be technically beside her and actually somewhere else entirely, and he did not glance at her face during those hours, and afterward he went one direction and she went another, and the palace closed between them like water closing over a stone. She was the queen of an entire kingdom. She was also, in most of the ways that mattered day to day, alone. She made herself useful, not because anyone asked, because uselessness made her anxious in a deep-bodied way that she associated with bad winters, when the farm had nothing coming in and the whole family got this pressed flat look around the eyes. She started with the household accounts. What she found in the household accounts was 3 separate embezzlement schemes, running in parallel, 2 of them going back 7 years and 1 of them going back 11. The head of the kitchen supply chain was skimming from the food budget and redirecting it through a cousin's merchant operation in the eastern city. The head groundskeeper had a private arrangement with the stone quarry that supplied the palace for repairs, and the senior linen attendant, this one was almost elegant, had been running a small private resale business out of the palace's linen surplus for over a decade, and had gotten so comfortable doing it that she had started ordering excess purely to have more to sell. Riva found all 3 by reading carefully and asking boring questions in the kind of tone that makes people assume you are simply being thorough rather than suspicious. She fixed all 3. She did not tell anyone. She did not report them dramatically to Kale, or call a meeting, or send a formal notice through the court. She restructured the account systems so that the skimming had nowhere to go anymore. She renegotiated the quarry contract herself, signing as the queen of the Eastern domestic accounts in a handwriting that was very clear and very final. She sent the linen attendant a note that was 2 sentences long and contained no accusations and also left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. None of them tried again. She went back to her window seat with her books. The palace had its rhythms, and she learned all of them. She learned which hallways got the morning light and which stayed cold all day. She learned that the head cook, a compact woman named Daya, who wore her sleeves rolled up and operated the kitchen like a military campaign, made a lentil soup on the 3rd Thursday of every month that was the best thing Riva had eaten since leaving home, and that if you appeared in the kitchen doorway at the right moment with a bowl in your hands and a look of sincere intent, Daya would fill it without comment, and possibly, over time, with a small nod that meant you had been judged acceptable. She learned the gardener's name, Pyotr. He was 64, built like a question mark from decades of bending over beds, and he had opinions about soil pH that he expressed with the same gravity other men reserved for war strategy. He had 14 grandchildren. He knew every plant in the palace garden by what she came to think of as their full names, not just their species, but their histories, which winter had nearly killed them, which spring had surprised him, which ones had come back. She started helping in the garden on Tuesday mornings. She built the library in the West Wing in the 2nd year. There had been books there, a collection with no order, no system, no logic, shoved onto shelves by whoever had last held a book and wanted to put it down. She spent 4 months cataloging and arranging and requesting new acquisitions through the palace's trade accounts, which she now effectively managed. The court noticed. They did not say anything to her directly. They said things to each other that reached her in the filtered, slightly softened form that information always takes when it travels through people who aren't sure how much they're allowed to tell you. What they said, in that filtered form, was, "Who does she think she is?" What they meant, she understood, was, "Why won't she behave like someone waiting to leave?" Because that was what they expected. That was the story they had decided on, that she was temporary, that the bond had made a mistake, that Cale was waiting for her to petition for dissolution, to give up, to free him from an arrangement that was clearly not working, and she was simply slow to understand that this was what she was supposed to do. She did not petition for dissolution. She planted tomatoes with Piotr. She organized the West Wing library. She fixed the accounts. She stayed. There was one member of the court who treated her like a person who had a future in this palace. Her name was Selene. She was the king's senior advisor, which in practical terms meant she had been running significant portions of the kingdom's domestic policy since before Cale took the seat, and would probably still be doing it after. She had silver hair she wore in a heavy braid, and the kind of face that had stopped having any use for performance. She spoke to Riva twice a month, sometimes more. They drank tea in the small south-facing room off the council chambers that got good afternoon light, and they talked about things that were real. "You catalogued the West Library," Selene said one afternoon. "A statement, not a question. It needed doing," Riva said. "It needed doing 8 years ago. 14 people have lived in your rooms over the past decade. None of them did it." Riva looked at her tea. Maybe they didn't stay long enough. Selene made a small sound. Not agreement exactly. Something more considered than agreement. "He is not a man who opens things," she said after a pause. "He waits. He calculates the cost of opening. He has not yet found a number that seems worth it to him." Riva looked up at her. What did he lose? Selene held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked at her tea. She did not answer. Riva did not push. She had learned the difference between silence that was closed and silence that was asking you to hold something for a little while before it was ready to be said out loud. This was the second kind. She held it. She brought it home to her East Wing rooms and put it in a corner of herself and let it sit there next to all the other things she had learned to hold without putting words on them. The third year was the hardest. She did not write that in her journal. She never wrote about him in the journal. The journal was where she kept the good things. Piotr's notes on the early tomatoes, a description of the way the light hit the West Library on December mornings, a sketch she'd made of the view from her window seat, the recipe for her mother's bread that she'd been trying to recreate in Daya's kitchen with moderate success and significant floury failure. She wrote around him the way water writes around a stone. The stone's shape is in the water's shape. Anyone reading carefully could have traced what was missing. The third year was hard because she stopped being angry, and she had not realized how much the anger had been holding her up. In the first year she had been angry in a brisk, useful way. The way you're angry when someone is wasting your time and you have things to do. In the second year, the anger had quieted to something more manageable, a low, persistent sound like the palace's old pipes, always there, easy to work around. By the third year it was gone, and what was left without it was something she did not have a good name for. It was not loneliness exactly. She had Piotr and Daya and Selene and the library and the accounts and the Tuesday morning garden hours. She had made, inside this palace that had not wanted her, a small life that was genuinely hers. It was something more specific than loneliness. It was the knowledge that she was doing fine. Doing fine is a particular kind of pain. It means you have survived something by becoming someone who doesn't need the thing they're surviving. It means the wall you built to protect yourself has gotten so solid and well-maintained that you have started, occasionally, to forget it is a wall and not just the shape of the room. She worked in the garden. She managed the accounts. She read in the library she had built. She was fine. She was so fine. He was always there. That was the thing about it. Not there in any way that reached her, but present in the palace the way weather is present, setting the conditions of everything else without making direct contact. She heard his voice sometimes in the corridors, low and deliberate, giving instructions she couldn't make out. She passed him occasionally in the main hall, always with people around him, always mid-conversation, always already turned away before she had finished not looking at him. Once, in the 4th year, she rounded a corner in the east garden at exactly the wrong moment and found him standing alone by the old stone wall, looking at something she couldn't identify. Just looking, at nothing particular, the way people look when they have gone somewhere inside themselves and need the outside to just stay still for a moment. He heard her step. He looked up. For exactly 3 seconds they were just two people looking at each other in a garden. Then one of his advisors came around the corner behind her, and the moment closed, and he turned and walked back toward the palace, and she stood there with her hands doing the thing they did when she didn't know what to do with them, and she thought very deliberately about whether Pyotr had staked the eastern tomato row yet, and whether she should check. She went and checked. The tomatoes were fine. She was fine. She learned what she could about him in the way you learn about weather, not by asking it, but by watching what it does. He had taken the Alpha King seat at 29, 2 years earlier than his bloodline's tradition, because his brother had died. His brother Devon had been the older one, the one the seat had been prepared for, the one who had grown up knowing the weight of it and how to wear it. He had died in the southern border conflict in the same spring that Kale's wife had died, a political marriage, arranged when Kale was 24, a woman from the Northern Alliance named Isel, who by all accounts had been decent and kind, and had genuinely tried to make something real with someone who was already well practiced at keeping himself at a survivable distance. She had died of a fever, in the field. She had gone to the southern border with the diplomatic party because she believed, correctly, that her presence would make certain negotiations possible that would otherwise fail. She had made them possible. She had died anyway, fast, 3 days from first symptoms. Davin had died in the same campaign, 7 weeks later. Different location, direct combat. Kale had been in the capital both times. He had received both messages within 43 days of each other. Riva found all of this not in any official record, but in the spaces between official records. In the accounting notes that mentioned suspended projects during those months. In the garden log Pyotr kept, he had kept a garden log for 30 years, and he recorded the king's visits to the garden alongside the rainfall and the bloom dates with the same matter-of-fact regularity. And the garden log showed that after the spring of those deaths, Kale had stopped coming to the garden entirely. He had come every few days before that. He had not come once since. She did not tell Pyotr she had read this. Pyotr already knew she had read it. He had left the log where she could find it. She planted a rosemary hedge along the east wall that year, because rosemary was what her grandmother had grown at the edges of things she wanted to remember. She did not say that to Pyotr. He looked at the rosemary and said it would do well in that soil, and she said she thought so too. The storm came in a July. Not a July storm the way some places have July storms. Warm, theatrical, over in 40 minutes. This was an eastern range storm, which meant it came in the way a decision comes, not with warning, but with a kind of inevitability you recognize only after it's already arrived. The sky went that particular green, the kind that people who grew up in this region learned to read the way sailors read certain wave patterns. Riva was in the West Library when the light changed. She had been there since mid-afternoon, working through a collection of agricultural texts she'd ordered from the Southern University's archive. She had been trying to understand why the palace's east fields were underproducing, and she had a theory about the drainage that she wanted to check against historical records. She had Pyotr's soil notes. She had 3 different maps of the estate's water table. She had a cup of tea gone cold. She looked up at the window. The sky was the green. She lit candles, all 4 that were on the reading table. She pulled the blanket off the reading chair and wrapped it around her shoulders, and thought about whether she wanted to go back to her rooms, and decided she did not. She was in the middle of a particularly interesting section about field drainage in clay-heavy soil, and she had been waiting 3 weeks for this archive collection to arrive, and she did not see why a storm should get to have an opinion about that. The power failed an hour later. Clean out, all at once, the palace going from lit to dark like something had made a decision. She sat in the candlelight with her agricultural texts and her cold tea and her blanket, and she was, she realized, more comfortable than she had been all week. She turned a page. The knock came at midnight, maybe past midnight. She had lost track. Not a knock the way attendants knocked, brief, deferential, announcing themselves while already half retreating. This was a different kind of knock, deliberate, even, like each rap was its own sentence. She stared at the library door. She was not expecting anyone. No one came to the West Library at midnight in a storm. She had built this library partly because no one came here at all, which made it the best room in the palace. She crossed the room and opened the door. He was standing in the dark corridor. No coat. His shirt was not disheveled, but there was something about the way he was standing that made her think he had been somewhere in the storm. Not outside, maybe, but close to it. His hair was damp at the temples. His hands were at his sides, not clasped, not formal, just hands. Standing the way he stood everywhere, like he had done an accounting of the space around him and found it adequate, but with something missing from it tonight. The certainty that usually lived in his stillness was there but quieter. He said, "I saw your light." 3 words, like he had decided to explain himself in the smallest possible unit. She looked at him for a moment. She stepped back from the doorway. He came in. He sat in the chair she hadn't been sitting in, near the cold fireplace. She sat in the chair she had been sitting in, near the candles and the agricultural texts. She did not offer tea. She did not have good tea. She did not apologize for not having good tea. For a while, neither of them said anything. The storm moved through the palace the way these storms did, not passing over but through, finding every gap, every old join in the stonework, pressing in at the windows, making the candle flames go sideways and come back. It was loud in the way of something that is not going to quiet down to make conversation easier, and does not care that you would prefer it to. She picked up her agricultural text. He looked at the fireplace. Cold, no fire in it. He looked at it like he was having a conversation with it that was not going well. She read, or she looked at the page. Whether she read anything was a different question. He said, "What is that?" She looked up. He was not looking at the fireplace anymore. He was looking at her book. "Agricultural drainage records from the Southern University Archive," she said. "I think the East Fields are underproducing because the drainage is wrong, and it's creating a subsurface water table that's drowning the root systems in wet years." He looked at her. She looked back. "You've been studying the fields," he said, "since the 2nd year." She paused. "The yield data was in the household accounts." He was quiet for a moment. "The household accounts that you now run?" "Yes." "Which you were not asked to run?" "No, they needed running." He made a sound she could not fully categorize. Not dismissive, more like something being recalibrated. "And you simply began. Someone had to." The storm pressed at the windows. The candles leaned and came back. "I found 3 embezzlement schemes in the household accounts," she said. She said it the way she would have said it to Selene, matter of fact, almost boring, because in her experience the most effective way to communicate something significant was to act like it was simply a thing that had happened and not a performance of how significant you thought it was. He turned his head and looked at her directly, not the glance from the hall, not the careful non-looking of the ceremonies. Actually looked. "You found them?" "Yes." "When?" "The first 2 in the 1st year. The 3rd about 6 months later. It was more elegant. I almost missed it." "And you reported this to?" "No one." He was very still. "You found evidence of crimes against the palace treasury and reported it to no one." "I fixed it," she said. "There was nothing to report after it was fixed." He looked at her for a long time. She kept her eyes on the page that she was not reading. "How?" he said. She explained. "The account restructuring, the quarry contract, the 2-sentence note to the linen attendant that had left no room for misunderstanding." She explained it the way she would explain anything, plainly, in the right order, without embellishment. When she finished, the fire was still cold and the storm was still loud, and he was still looking at her with the expression of someone who had made a calculation that had come out differently than expected. 3 years, he said. "Yes. You've been managing the household accounts for 3 years. You found and resolved 3 separate financial crimes. You rebuilt the West Wing Library." A pause. "And the East Garden drainage project." She looked up. How do you know about the drainage project? Pyotr told me. Something small and complicated moved through her at that. Pyotr talks to you. He keeps me informed about the garden. She thought about Pyotr's log. 30 years of garden records. All the days before, when the king had come. All the days after, when he had stopped. He never mentioned that, she said. I asked him not to. The candles moved. The storm said whatever it was saying. Why? She said. Not a question exactly. More like a word she let out into the room to see what happened to it. He looked at the fireplace again, the cold dark of it. I thought, he said, and stopped. He was a man, she understood, for whom starting a sentence and then stopping it was not a small thing. It was not carelessness or rudeness. It was the specific difficulty of someone who had learned a long time ago to finish sentences only when he was certain of where they were going, and had not, in some considerable while, been certain of much. She waited. I thought, he said again, that it was better, for you. If I... He stopped again. Kale, she said. It was the first time she had used his name out loud. To him. In 5 years. He looked at her. Not the way he had looked at her across the hall. Not the way he had looked at her in the garden. Not the careful not looking of ceremonies. This was a different kind of looking. The kind that comes when someone has put down the weight they've been carrying, not because they decided to, but because their arms finally gave out. I thought it was better, he said, if you had room to leave. The room was quiet for a moment, under the storm. You were waiting for me to leave, she said. I was not asking you to, but you were waiting. He was quiet. I have been here 5 years, she said. I have run your accounts and built a library in your west wing, and planted a rosemary hedge in your east garden, and made arrangements with your quarry, and spent 4 months teaching myself the water table history of your east fields. She kept her voice level. She had learned a long time ago that level voices carry further. What number were you waiting for? He looked at her. What number, she said, would have been enough to tell you that I was not leaving. He told her about Devon that night. Not the official version. The real one. The one that lived in the parts of the story the official records smoothed over, because official records are cowardly about the things that actually matter. He told her that Devon had been afraid of the seat. That everyone who had known him, really known him, not court known him, had understood that the weight of the kingship was the wrong weight for Devon's particular shape of strength. That Devon's strength was direct and human, and needed to be close to things, close to people, and the seat required a kind of distance that Devon had never been able to sustain without it costing him something visible. That Kale had known this, that they had talked about it, that they had worked out, the two of them, a plan for how Devon could hold the seat in a way that kept it from grinding him down, a plan that required Kale to take on the parts of the role that ate at Devon most, the political distance, the diplomatic strategy, the long cold calculations of resource and alliance. That this plan had been working, that the Southern campaign had happened before the plan had finished saving Davin from the parts of the seat that were going to break him. He told her about Yisel, that she had been kind, that kind was not a small word, and he did not use it as a small word, that she had tried, inside an arrangement that had never been chosen by feeling on either side, to make something real, that she had mostly succeeded, that what they had built was not passionate or consuming, but it was genuine, and there was decency in it, and he had valued it, truly, in the way you value the things you did not expect to value. That she had died being brave, that he had received the message and gone to his rooms and not come out for 3 days, and nobody had known what to do with that, and so they had done the efficient thing and waited outside the door until he came out, which he had, eventually, because the kingdom needed him to, and he was good at doing things because they needed to be done. That 7 weeks later the second message had come. He did not describe what those 43 days had done to him. He did not need to. She was a person who read water tables by looking at what the soil told her, and she could read what those 43 days had done the same way, by looking at what they had left behind. The garden he had stopped visiting, the distance he had put between himself and everything that could be taken, the door he had not opened. She did not say any of this out loud. She listened. That was the whole of what she did, for a long while. She listened to a man who had been carrying 43 days inside him for 6 years, who had sealed the weight of it behind a wall so well built and so maintained that she suspected he had stopped noticing where the wall was and where he began. She listened, and she did not flinch, and she did not offer anything that sounded like comfort as solution, because she had learned that the kind of comfort that tries to fix something in the same breath as hearing it is not comfort, it is impatience wearing a soft face. She listened until the storm went quiet. The quiet came in, the way quiet does after something loud, not gradually but all at once, like a door closing. The storm was simply over. The palace settled around them, the old stones making their old sounds, water running off the eaves outside. The candles had burned down to stubs. The light was lower, warmer. The room had gone from a library to something more like a burrow, small and close and separate from the dark outside. She looked at the candles. He looked at his hands. "I read Piotr's garden log," she said. "He was still. He records your visits in it," she said. "All the ones before." He did not say anything. "He keeps it on the third shelf of the western tool shed," she said. "He left it where it was easy to find. He leaves things where they are easy to find when he thinks someone should find them." She looked at the dying candles. "You used to come every 3 days," she said, "before." A long silence. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She did not know exactly why she was telling him this. Maybe because it was almost morning and the storm was gone, and they had been in this room for hours, and she had decided, somewhere in the middle of those hours, that she was done writing around what was missing and leaving it for someone else to find in the shape of the water. "I planted rosemary along the east wall," she said. "In the 4th year." He turned his head toward her. "My grandmother grew it at the edges of things she wanted to remember," she said. "I planted at the edges of things I don't want to forget." The last candle was very low. The first pale edge of morning was beginning at the windows. He said, "What did you plant it to remember?" She thought about how to answer that honestly, without letting herself tumble off the edge of honesty into something she was not ready to name. "The garden before I came to it," she said. "What it was, what it could be, that things come back." She looked at him. "My grandmother named me after a river that dries up every summer," she said. "She said the point was, it always comes back." He looked at her for a long time. She held the look without looking away. When the morning light had filled the window properly, she said, "You should go before the staff comes through." He said, "I know." He did not go. He looked at the empty fireplace. She looked at the window. The light was gray gold, new, the kind of light that happens only in the first 10 minutes after a storm, when everything is washed and the world looks like it has been given a second chance to make its first impression. He said, "I owe you an accounting." She looked at him. 5 years, he said, "of everything you've done here that he stopped, that I knew about and said nothing." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew about the library," she said. "Yes." "The accounts." "Selene told me." Of course Selene had told him. Selene told him everything she thought he needed to hear, and not one word more. "The garden," she said. "Piotr." She looked at the window. "You knew. All of it." "Yes." She let that sit. "And you said nothing," she said. "I didn't know." He stopped. Started again. "I did not know how to say something without opening a door. I was not certain I could walk through without." He stopped. She waited. "Without it costing you something," he said. "If I walk through and then found I couldn't." KL. He looked at her. "I have already paid," she said. 5 years is already paid. Whatever you are afraid of costing me, I have been paying it, in the only currency this situation had available." She kept her voice even, level. "So the accounting you owe me is not an apology. I don't want an apology. I want to know what you are actually saying." He was very still. "I want to know," she said, "if you are asking to start." The morning light moved through the room. He said, "I want to understand who you are, if you will allow it." And there it was, the plainest sentence. 4 syllables in understand, 2 in allow. Not a declaration, not a sweep, just a man who had been standing on the wrong side of a door for 5 years, finally asking whether the door was still an option. She looked at him. She thought about what it had cost her to be fine, what it had cost her to be someone who didn't need anything from him, what it would cost her to stop being that person and risk wanting something that could still, technically, go wrong. She added up the numbers. You have to actually show up, she said. Not like emergencies. Not just in storms. I know. And you have to tell me things. Not everything at once, but things. I know. She looked at the dead candles, at the morning light, at the man sitting in the chair by the cold fireplace looking at her, with the specific expression of someone who has spent 6 years waiting for something he could not name, and has just, with significant uncertainty about the outcome, asked for it. All right, she said. He came back the next evening. Knocked. She opened the door. He was standing in the corridor in the ordinary evening light. No storm, no emergency, no reason. Just there. She let him in. They sat in the library again because that was where they had figured out they could talk, and you do not move the thing that is working. He asked her about the Eastfield drainage. She got out her maps and her water table records and she explained her theory, and he listened the way she had learned he listened. Completely, without interrupting, with a quality of attention that was unusual in people who ran things, because people who ran things often listened with only the part of their mind not already composing the response. He did not compose the response while she was talking. He just listened. Then he told her something he'd never told his advisors, that he had always found the southern fields more productive, and had wondered, for years, whether the problem was the drainage or the seed stock, and he had never had anyone to think through it with who wasn't also trying to tell him what he wanted to hear. She said it was the drainage. He said he thought she was probably right. She made tea. It was better than the tea had been during the storm, because she had asked Dia for the good leaves, which she had previously been hoarding for occasions she could not quite identify, and she had decided that this was the occasion. He came back the evening after that, and the one after. Not dramatically. He knocked. She opened the door. They sat in the library, or, as the weather improved, in the east garden, near the rosemary hedge she had planted and Piotr's staked tomato rows. He told her things. She told him things. It was not a sweep, or a revelation, or a transformation. It was the careful, slightly awkward work of two people who had both become very good at not needing anyone learning, one evening at a time, to need each other. He learned the name of the river she was named after. He asked her to say the old word for it in her grandmother's dialect. She did. He said it back, slowly, getting the pronunciation wrong in a way that was endearing, in a manner she was not going to tell him about yet. She learned why he had not come to the garden. Not just the facts of it, she had known the facts, but what the garden had been before. What he and Devon had done there as children, what Devon used to call the old oak at the south end of the grounds, how Devon had proposed to his wife under that oak, and how Cale had stood nearby, pretending not to be moved by it. She told him about the farm, about running the accounts since 16, about her mother's bread, about the cedar tree outside her old window, and the specific creak it made in wind that she had heard every night of her childhood, and that she had tried, in the early months at the palace, to replace with the sound of the palace's pipes, which were not a satisfying substitute. He listened to all of it. She went back to the east garden one Tuesday morning and found Piotr already there. He looked at her. She looked at him. He looked at the rosemary hedge. She looked at the rosemary hedge. He came to the garden yesterday, Piotr said. I know, she said. First time since the spring of the bad years. I know, she said. Piotr bent down and pulled a weed from the base of the rosemary with the practiced efficiency of a man who had been pulling weeds for 50 years and had made his peace with the fact that there would always be more. Good soil for it here, he said. Like I told you. Like you told me, she agreed. They worked for a while in the comfortable silence of people who do not need to fill the air between them. The door to his private chambers, the one she had stood outside on the first night, the one she had measured the meaning of and then decided to stop measuring, he opened eventually. Not dramatically, not as a declaration. He simply knocked on her library door one evening, and when she opened it, he said, I want to show you something, and he walked her down the corridor and through the palace to the wing she had never been into, and he opened the door himself and stood aside. She walked in. The room was not what she expected. Not grand, not sealed. It was the room of a person who had been living in it. Books with broken spines, a desk covered in the organized disorder of someone who worked there properly, a window seat with a worn cushion, 2 chairs that faced each other near the fireplace. 2 chairs. She looked at the chairs. At the 2 chairs. He was standing in the doorway watching her look around. "You put in 2 chairs," she said. "A few months ago," he said. She turned and looked at him. "Months ago," she said. "I was being optimistic," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the moment became a thing with weight to it. Then she sat in one of the chairs. He came in. He sat in the other one. Outside the window the palace grounds went their quiet nighttime way, the old oak at the south end standing where it had always stood, the rosemary hedge along the east wall holding its shape, Piotr's tomatoes staked and patient in their rows. The fire was lit. The room was warm. Nobody said anything for a while, and it was the best kind of nothing, full and settled, the kind of silence that is not absence but presence, the kind that only exists between people who have gotten through enough to be able to sit in it. She looked at the room, at the window, at the fire. She had come to this palace with one bag. She had built a library, and a garden, and a set of accounts, and a rosemary hedge, and a Tuesday morning habit, and a slow-working knowledge of the water table of an estate that had been here for 200 years and would be here for 200 more. She had built, without meaning to, or maybe while meaning to without quite admitting it, something that looked like home. Not because the palace had become warm, not because the court had changed its mind about her, not because anything had swept her off her feet or resolved itself cleanly in the space of one stormy night. Because she was the river her grandmother had named her for. She dried up in the hard seasons. She came back. She always came back. This is a story about what patience actually costs. Not patience as a virtue. Virtue is too clean a word for it. Patience as the specific daily discipline of a person who has decided to be real inside circumstances that keep offering them reasons not to bother. Riva did not wait because she was weak. She did not stay because she had no options. She stayed because she had looked at the situation honestly, in the plain number way she looked at everything, and decided that the thing on the other side of the door was worth the cost of the door. Kale did not change because someone fixed him. He was not broken. He was a man who had learned, at great expense, that loving things meant holding them while they went away, and had made the reasonable, if ultimately costly decision, that not holding was safer. He changed because he ran out of good arguments against trying, because someone had been there, quietly and without demanding, long enough that the trying began to look possible again. That is not a fairy tale. That is not a sweep. That is the harder, slower, more real thing. 2 people learning to trust the ground under their feet, one evening at a time, until one day they look down and realize they have been standing on solid earth for a while now, and the world has not, yet, asked them to pay for it.